It is because I agree with Barack Obama, President of the United States of America, in the position that national security is more important than personal privacy, that I feel compelled to affirm today's resolution resolved, that national security is more important than personal privacy. For clarification of today's round, I offer the following definitions. Privacy: the freedom from unauthorized intrusion, that's from Merriam-Webster's dictionary. National security: it's a collective term for the defense in foreign relations of a country and the protections of the interests of a country, according to dictionary.com. The highest value within today's round is the safety of American citizens. This value is most important within today's round because safety is the top priority in this people. The best criterion for evaluating this resolution is the amount of potentially saved American lives. It best achieves my value of the safety of American citizen because it retains the saving American lives. The best criterion for in affirming this resolution, I offer the following contentions. Contention 1. The purpose of a government is to protect a person from enemies. Ayn Rand says in her book, For the New Intellectual, the only proper purpose of a government is to protect man's rights, which means to protect him from physical violence. A proper government is only a policeman acting as an agent of man's self-defense, and as such may resort to force only against those who start the use of force. The only proper functions of a government are the police, to protect you from criminals, the army, to protect you from foreign invaders, and the courts, to protect your property and contracts from the breach of fraud by others, to settle disputes by rational rules according to objective law. This contention affects resolution because if someone is given the choice between their privacy and their life in a life or death situation, nearly 100% of the time they are going to choose their life and not their privacy. Contention 2. The United States needs to conduct surveillance in order to predict and prevent terrorist attacks on American soil. In recent years, these programs, together with other intelligence, have protected the U.S. and our allies from terrorist threats across the globe, to include helping prevent the potential terrorist events over 15 times since 9/11. That's a quote from General Keith Alexander, who was the former director of the National Security Administration, or the NSA. The programs we currently have in place have already saved countless lives and prevented numerous terrorist attacks. Prevented attacks were not released in order to protect national security. Contention 3. Intrusive searches at airports have prevented many terrorist attacks. Stephen Phipson, president of Britain-based Smiths Detection, the world's largest maker of full-body scanners, insists that the machines only produce images that show the outlines of the human body, not body parts. The privacy concerns are valid, he says, but our software can blur out parts of the body, and the scanners are far less intrusive than the traditional pat-down of the body. At the U.S. airports where scanners have already been installed, security officers must look at the images in isolated rooms and are not allowed to have any piece of equipment, such as a camera or mobile phone, that could be used to capture or copy the images, so it's not really any privacy risk there. And these scanners are far less invasive than traditional pat-downs. Nowhere within the U.S. Constitution will you find the word privacy, by the way. And the Fourth Amendment prohibits unreasonable search and seizure. And would you really consider it unreasonable to want to prevent terrorist attacks?
Are you finished?
Yeah.
I have a few questions to start off with my cross-examination. First of all, would you repeat your definition for the word privacy that you included?
Freedom from unauthorized intrusion, and that's from the Merriam-Webster's dictionary.
How do you apply this definition of privacy, where you clearly state that privacy is freedom from unauthorized intrusion, when the government's collection of telephony metadata clearly intrudes upon an individual's home, rights, and lives without any authorization?
It would have been authorized, though, because the government has policies in place that would prevent them from, that would allow them to monitor suspected terrorists or other individuals who may be dangerous to prevent terrorist attacks.
Do you understand what telephony metadata is?
No, would you like to explain?
Telephony metadata, what the government is actually gathering is data on the entire American people's telephone information. You're not gathering information on suspected terrorists. So therefore, your argument you presented just there.
It is being gathered, but it is not being reviewed, so that in the event that a terrorist attack does happen, that it can go back and it can be reviewed to see who these people have been in contact with, so that they can prevent yet another terrorist attack.
I'll move on to my next question. What specific instances has government surveillance what specific instances has government surveillance clearly prevented an imminent terrorist attack or saved American lives?
Well, according to the general that was the director of the National Security Administration, it has prevented over 50 terrorist attacks, but he cannot release these incidents because if he reveals information about these incidents, it could throw terrorists off on how much they know.
My next question is, what's the purpose of your third contention being included about the intrusive searches at airports? The issue of privacy in question deals with individuals' right to privacy through the telephony metadata collection and the recent leak by Edward Snowden about the NSA.
So it's
what purpose does it serve?
What I was referring to there is how they have full body scanners, which some individuals consider to be intrusive, but these body scanners do not show any parts of the bodies, and it searches for bombs or weapons or other items on the individual, which could be used to hijack the airplane or to destroy the airplane, to use it as a weapon in a terrorist attack.
But those don't have. But the airport security searches have nothing to do with the recent leak by the NSA.
That NSA isn't the recent leak by the NSA isn't the point of this. It's national security versus personal privacy.
As a result of the information leaked by the recently leaked by Edward Snowden about the NSA. I can't in good conscience allow the U.S. government to destroy privacy, internet freedom, and basic liberties for people around the world with this massive surveillance machine that they're secretly building. It's because I agree with Edward Snowden, the former National Security Agency employee that exposed the American government's ubiquitous and covert surveillance program in the position that vague national security concerns do not constitute an invasion of an individual's privacy through covert and unwarranted surveillance, that I feel compelled to negate today's resolution. Resolved. I negate today's resolution that the United States should be able to use covert surveillance programs to monitor unaware citizens without any probable cause in the interest of national security. For clarification of today's round, I offer the following definitions. First, national security. National security is a corporate term covering both national defense and foreign relations. It refers to the protection of a nation from attack or other danger by holding adequate armed forces and guarding state secrets. Next, electronic surveillance. Electronic surveillance is defined according to U.S. legal definitions as the acquisition by an electronic, mechanical, or other surveillance device of the contents of any wire communication to or from a person in the United States without the consent of any party thereto, if such acquisition occurs in the United States but does not include the acquisition of those communications of computer trespassers that would be permissible under Section 251 of the United States Penal Code. Next, I'd like to define the right to privacy. The right to privacy is the right to be let alone in the absence of some reasonable public interest in a person's activities, like those of celebrities or participants in newsworthy events. The highest value within today's round is the philosophical concept of social contract theories. Social contract theories address the idea that the authority of the government must always be derived from the consent of the people that are governed. According to the philosophy of John Locke, individuals are in a state of perfect freedom when they enter into the world. However, when an individual provides their consent to be governed, they relinquish this state of perfect freedom in exchange for a level of security. Individuals, however, do not transfer all of their rights to the government when they enter into this social contract between the government and the people. Social contract theory is the most important value in today's round because the government does not have the consent of the governed to deny the people of their right to privacy by carrying out ubiquitous surveillance programs in the interest of national security. The resolution proposed by the affirmative violates the consent of the American people that is necessary for a government to govern in such a manner. The best criterion for evaluating today's resolution is civil liberty. Civil liberty is defined as freedom from arbitrary governmental influence, specifically by the denial of governmental power, and in the United States especially, as guaranteed by the Bill of Rights. It best achieves my value of social contract theory because the United States government's use of a covert surveillance program is a violation of the civil liberties guaranteed to the American people by the Fourth Amendment. Thus, the government does not have the consent of the people to be monitored without probable cause in the interest of vague national security concerns. In negating the resolution, I offer the following contentions. My first contention is the government's use of secret court orders issued by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court that required Verizon to release telephony metadata to the government violates rights guaranteed in the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution states that the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause. The government set up these foreign intelligence surveillance courts as a special court that addressed matters, particularly the issuance of search warrants relating to national security. Judge Richard D. Leon of the U.S. District Court of the District of Columbia held that the government's ubiquitous surveillance programs violated Fourth Amendment rights. In the Supreme Court decision of Smith v. Maryland, the Supreme Court held that individuals do not have a reasonable expectation of privacy in regard to the numbers they dialed from their telephone. However, Judge Leon noted that the advanced technology that is used currently for this gathering of telephony metadata makes this 34-year-old court precedent invalid in the argument. The Fourth Amendment requires reasonable cause for search and seizure to take place, and there was not any reasonable cause for the government to collect this telephony metadata from millions of Verizon customers through issuance of a secret court order. Millions of Americans without any probable cause had their data collected, and not only collected but stored. The violation of the Fourth Amendment supports my criterion for civil liberties. The gathering of telephony metadata without any reasonable cause constitutes an unreasonable search and seizure as defined in the Fourth Amendment. My second contention is the National Security Agency's storage of telephony metadata for up to 5 years impedes an individual's right to due process of law guaranteed in the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution. The Fifth Amendment states that no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on presentment of an indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any case to witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The National Security Agency's collection and storage of this telephony metadata impedes an individual's right to a fair trial as a result of due process. The NSA's illegal gathering of this data can be drawn upon by a plethora of government agencies to help convict an individual of a crime later on. So for example, a number you dialed 4 years ago could be used as evidence against you in a case for if you were on trial for murder, for example. If you called the individual that was murdered 4 years ago, the government could then gain this data and say, well, hey, the individual in question called this person at this time, and that data could be used against you without your knowledge that it was ever even gathered. The violation of the Fifth Amendment supports my criterion of civil liberties. The gathering and storage of telephony metadata hinders an individual's right to a fair trial as a result of violations of the Fourth Amendment. The data gathered can be used to incriminate an individual for committing a crime at a later date, thus denying them a real, fair trial. My third and final contention is that the National Security Agency's gathering and storage of telephony metadata violates an individual's reasonable right to privacy that can be implied from the Ninth Amendment of the United States Constitution. The Ninth Amendment states that the enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. The enumerated protections of the United States Constitution clearly show that the founders had the idea of privacy and the right to privacy in mind when they wrote the Constitution. The First Amendment guarantees privacy of beliefs by protecting freedom of speech, assembly, and religion. The Third Amendment protects the privacy of the home by preventing an individual from being forced to quarter troops. These two amendments are just two examples of how the framers had privacy rights in mind when they wrote the Constitution. And then to protect any further things that can come up later in time, the framers included the Ninth Amendment, which protects individuals, which states that individuals have more rights than those specifically listed in the Constitution. Thus, through the interpretation of the Ninth Amendment, it can be implied that the right to privacy is included amongst those rights that are not specifically listed but still retained by the people. The violation of the right to privacy that the Ninth Amendment can be interpreted to include supports my criterion of civil liberties. I've shown you that the government's use of secret court orders issued by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court that required Verizon to release telephony metadata to the government violates rights guaranteed in the Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, and the right to privacy that the Ninth Amendment can be interpreted to include. For these reasons, we can clearly conclude that the social contract theory should be upheld, and the United States should not be able to use covert surveillance programs to monitor unaware citizens without any probable cause in the interest of vague national security concerns.
Okay, so you were saying that the people were not aware that they were, when Verizon released this phone data to the United States government, you were saying that the people were not aware. Is that correct?
Prior to the leak by Edward Snowden.
Okay, I'm going to agree with you there. But this information was being recorded with America's best interests in mind, because if this information prevented over 50 terrorist attacks.
Can you show me where it says it prevented over 50 terrorist attacks, and can you show me what terrorist attacks it prevented?
I cannot show you what terrorist attacks that it prevented, as it is classified for another 20 years. But General Keith Alexander, the former director of the National Security Information, said, quote, "In recent years, these programs, together with other intelligence, have protected the United States and our allies from terrorist threats across the globe, to include helping prevent the potential terrorist events of over 50 times since 9/11.
That doesn't mean that an individual's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure can be denied because of these terrorist attacks. The Fourth Amendment states that there must be probable cause to search an individual and search their effects or persons, and your telephony metadata are your effects, and those are being searched illegally by the government.
They aren't being searched, they're just being recorded to be reviewed at a later time in the event that a terrorist event would occur.
Actually, that's false. That data is being stored, it's not only being taken, it's then being reviewed for any variables that they're looking for, and then it's being stored, then it can be used later by the government to convict you.
Do you have any evidence with you that shows that it is being reviewed?
It is being reviewed.
That it's being reviewed before it is being stored?
The NSA leak by Edward Snowden shows that the government was gathering this data, and then putting it into storage to create a information system that could later be searched and queued.
Yes, it's being stored, not searched. As it is being stored to look for these things.
In nature, taking this data from an individual is searching them. You can move it. You have 30 seconds left.
Okay, and also, at this time, the contracts with phone companies state that their information is going to be forwarded to the government so that it is being monitored.
No.
Current contracts show since the leak.
We're not talking about since the leak. We're talking about the time of the leak. And the contracts state that this information can be gathered by the company. That when you enter into the contract with the company, then you know that the company will have access to this data of yours. But they never stated that they were selling the data or relinquishing the data to the government for surveillance purposes. Now time for your rebuttal.
Alright, so I'd like to refer to 3 of the worst terrorist attacks in American history, which were the 9/11 events in New York City, Alexandria, Virginia, and Pennsylvania, and the hijackings. These events resulted in over 3,000 deaths and numerous injuries. And these events could have been prevented by the information that is being gathered right now. Then referring to my contention 3, refers to the, quote, intrusive searches at airports. Stephen Phipson, who is the president of the Britain-based Smith's Detection, says, that the privacy concerns are valid and that the software that they are currently using blurs out body parts. And these also currently they have pat-downs, and before 9/11, pat-downs and searches were not mandated at all airports, and due to that, the 9/11 events did occur. So if those protocols would have been in place, 9/11 could have very well been prevented. Then also going to my contention 1, which says the purpose of the government is to protect a person from its enemies. Terrorists are our enemies, and quite frankly, I believe that everyone would believe with that. The only proper purpose of a government is to protect man's rights, which means protect him from physical violence. A proper government is only a policeman acting as an agent of men's self-defense, and as such may resort to force only against those who start the use of force. The only proper functions of the government are the police to protect you from criminals, the army to protect you from foreign invaders, and the courts to protect your property and contracts from breach or fraud by others, to settle disputes by natural rules according to objective law. And although that these policies were classified until recently, involving the monitoring of recording of phone data, they prevented many terrorist attacks. And good.
First of all, I'd like to start off by refuting some of my opponent's arguments. First of all, whether the safety of American citizens is not a factor in whether or not their rights are being violated. The question at hand is whether or not the American people's rights are being violated and what's more important. And clearly an individual's rights are more important, because if we allow these rights to be violated in one instance, then where is the next line drawn, or where the government is able to blur the line of our civil liberties in pursuit of national security. Though my opponent pointed out that there have been over 50 instances where national security has been protected by the gathering of telephony metadata and surveillance. However, the government's not willing to acknowledge what situations these are. Next, I'd like to point out that his third contention, that the intrusive searches at airports has no relevance in the debate, because the debate today is about the privacy versus national security as it applies to the recent leak by Edward Snowden and the gathering of telephony metadata by the government. I'd like to emphasize that the Fourth Amendment right to unreasonable search and seizure is being violated entirely by the gathering of this telephony metadata. The American people have no clue that this data is being gathered, nor does the government have any probable cause in gathering said data. It would be different if the government was only gathering data on suspected terrorists, but the government is gathering data on all American citizens under the company providing their phone service. Not only that, because the government knew this would never comply in a regular court, the government set up a secret special court to specifically issue these warrants for surveillance. Also, I'd like to emphasize that though privacy is not explicitly stated in the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights of the Constitution, privacy is implied throughout the Constitution. First, in the First Amendment, because it protects against your privacy of beliefs, religion, and ability to petition the government. Second of all, the Fifth Amendment, you lose your ability to have a fair trial by the government gathering and storing this telephony metadata. The government can take this data and then use it against you later on if you are being tried for a crime, and thus you're self-incriminating yourself because of your telephone calls. It's important to realize that you cannot relinquish these rights now, because then the government has no lines. The government can continue to blur these lines and overreach its bounds. I've shown you that the government's use of secret court orders issued by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court that required Verizon to release telephony metadata to the government violates rights guaranteed in the Fourth Amendment, your right against an unreasonable search and seizure without probable cause, and that a warrant can only be issued by probable cause. The Fifth Amendment, you lose your ability to have a due process and a fair trial. and the right to privacy that the Ninth Amendment can be interpreted to include. The Ninth Amendment clearly states that individuals have more rights than those listed explicitly in the Constitution. It can be interpreted that the Ninth Amendment is meant to include other issues that arise at a later date, such as this gathering of telephony metadata, such as including your right to privacy. So your right to privacy can be interpreted to be included in the Ninth Amendment because privacy was clearly important to the framers because it can be seen in the First Amendment, the Third Amendment, and the Fifth Amendment. For these reasons, we can clearly conclude that the social contract theory should be upheld and that the government must always have the consent of the governed to govern. And if the government does not have the American people's consent to monitor them in such a way, therefore, the United States should not be able to use covert surveillance programs to monitor unaware citizens without any probable cause in the interest of national security concerns. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on the behalf of the negative today.
Okay, so the main question today is whether the Fourth Amendment rights are being violated, and as my opponent says they are, I am still going to disagree that the United States does have probable cause because they do not know if these people are terrorists. How is the government to know if, say, the 90-year-old woman next door is building bombs in her basement? And saying that the government doesn't have probable cause, I believe that the government does have probable cause because the interests of the American people are generally their general welfare and the security that they have of being in America, as well, of course, as their privacy, but monitoring this data is not affecting them. So, how is this information hurting them as long as they are not doing anything wrong? And so Barack Obama, President of the United States of America, stated that it's important to recognize that you can't have 100% security and also then have 100% privacy and zero inconvenience. And clearly we must affirm this resolution. And thank you for allowing me to speak as affirmative today, and the end.